Good morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting live from the Hasselson studio here on Market Street in Corning, and we have a lot to discuss. First of all, we're going to go through your comments during last night's debate. Yes, it was a late night. What did you think? Many are panning Walz's performance, or at least in the media, twisting it in a way to say he started off shaky and finished much better. That's kind of been a consensus from many in the media. But let's first go to viewer comments. Some of them I did edit only because it was going on live during the debate and kind of out of context, not really sure the meaning. But here we go. Frank, well, approximately 1 hour in, and so far I would say vice presidential candidates are far more competent than either presidential candidate. Thank you very much. Different comment, obviously a different comment. I thought there was to be no pencil or paper, but Walz was clearly writing using such. Guess I was wrong. Well, you couldn't come with pre-written notes or statements. You could have paper and pen to take notes. But yeah, you couldn't come in with a statement. I will admit, though, that Walz is more likable than I thought. Interesting. For the most part, I think the debate was fairly moderated. I think it looks fairly moderated in some instances because we're so used to constant bias. I don't think it was all that fairly moderated. I think the fact check about something that was factually accurate was distracting, was unnecessary. Even some in the left media saying similar, that they don't feel that it was fairly moderated. But thank you for the point. If that's what you saw. Final arguments come up, but I think Vance flabbergasted Walz a couple of times at the end. I agree. Walz was pretty nervous. This is a different viewer. Walz was pretty nervous and jerked his head around a lot. Also stammered and misspoke when he said that he became friends with school shooters. I was happy with Vance's performance. He stayed calm. I liked his take on carbon emissions and how he flipped it to Harris. Thank you very much. And if you're just joining us, these are comments from viewers. I like that Vance kept saying that Harris talks about all she wants to do, but hasn't done anything as VP. I thought that was a very effective line as well. And I also thought his closing statement, meaning Vance, was fabulous. Walz kept looking like a deer caught in the headlights. And then finally, JD really helped his own image as a likable guy. I could imagine JD as president, but not Tim. Thank you very much. We do have some other issues we're going to get to, but the lion's share, of course, this morning will be on last night's vice presidential debate, the last debate, it looks like, before Election Day, November 5th. A little bit later on in the program, also we'll be talking with family court judge Mary Tarantelli. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Okay, first, Israel has vowed vengeance after, quote, defeated and ineffective Iranian ballistic missiles attack, that resulted in, I don't like the way they word this, only 3 casualties, but still 3 casualties. Israel has vowed vengeance after Iran launched 200 ballistic missiles at the Jewish state Tuesday, dozens of which penetrated air defense and struck Tel Aviv and other population centers. Despite this attack having more impact than the earlier strike in April, a Jewish school was among the places badly damaged. There were very few casualties. Only 2 Israelis were injured, and the only death was a Palestinian man in the West Bank. The attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective, says President Joe Biden. Make no mistake, the United States is fully supportive of Israel. That's President Biden. And I'm just going to go through this quickly. Netanyahu says Iran has made a big mistake tonight and will pay for it. Just quickly from Netanyahu's speech. Citizens of Israel, at the start of my remarks, I send condolences to the families of those who were murdered in the abhorrent terrorist attack, and my best wishes for a quick recovery to the wounded. As in the missile attack, there was also a murderous guiding hand behind this terrorist attack. It came from Tehran. This evening, Iran again attacked Israel with hundreds of missiles. This attack failed. It was thwarted thanks to Israel's air defense array, which is the most advanced in the world. I commend the IDF for the impressive achievement. It was also thwarted thanks to our alertness and responsibility, citizens of Israel. I also thank the U.S. for its support in our defensive effort. This evening, Iran made a big mistake, and it will pay for it. The regime in Tehran does not understand our determination to defend ourselves and to exact a price from our enemies. Sinwar and Deif did not understand this. Neither did Nazarol or Mohsen. Apparently, there are those in Tehran who do not understand this either. They will. We will keep to the rule we have determined. Whoever attacks us, we attack them. This is true whether we fight the axis of evil. It is true in Judea and Samaria. It is true in Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, and Syria, and it's also true in Iran. We are fighting the axis of evil everywhere, including in southern Lebanon and Gaza, where our heroic soldiers are active. Today, more than ever, the forces of light in the world must unite and work together against the Ayatollah's dark regime, which is the source of terror and evil in our region. They must stand alongside Israel. The choice has never been more clear between tyranny and freedom, between the blessing and the curse. On the eve of Rosh Hashanah, I say to you, citizens of Israel, Israel has the momentum and the axis of evil is in retreat. We will do whatever needs to be done to continue this trend, to achieve all our war objectives, especially the return of all of our hostages, and ensure our existence and our future. A good and safe year to you all. Okay. Also, at least 7 were dead in a suspected terror attack shooting in Tel Aviv. At least 7 people were killed when 2 terrorists opened fire and stabbed victims near Tel Aviv on Tuesday. The attack came only minutes before Iran launched a large volley of ballistic missiles into Israeli territory in retaliation for last week's killing of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. Okay, there we are. That was just a quick update. Virtual waves coming in. Thank you very much. Okay, so the vice presidential debate, if you do the math, Tim Walz had more speaking time, 40 minutes, 42 seconds, but it was pretty close. J.D. Vance at 38 minutes, 59 seconds. The kind of common theme coming from the media this morning, and I'll give you an example. This is from the New York Times. Vance sought to recast Trump. Walz found his footing late. The TV-friendly style of Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, whose mic was muted in an early flashpoint over fact-checking, came up against an aw shucks but occasionally halting performance of Governor Tim Walz. Some have compared it, and I think this is an overstatement, but it was, and I'll read the quote for you later on, but one of the commentators after the debate compared Walz's performance to Joe Biden's performance, meaning it was very difficult to watch. The New York Times calls it halting at times. I think it's weird that Walz, and all of this is open for your opinion as well. Tim Walz staggered. J.D. Vance keeping a cool head, doing a fantastic job, even when he was fact-checked, questioning. I thought we weren't going to fact-check. And the worst part about that fact-check early on was what he was saying was factually accurate. I do believe one takeaway that I have, and what did you think about the moderators? Because we heard from one viewer last night while watching, thought the moderators were fair. I will say, and I always find this strange, and it's common though, so maybe it's just my media lens on it. Sometimes the questions that they ask are so long and wordy and really making the show all about them. Now, I'm not saying you can't get into some specifics, but every once in a while you start to say, wait a minute, are we gonna continue to debate here, or is this just an op-ed? So I found that kind of off-putting. Now, Walz admitting at one point, I'm a knucklehead during what they're calling a genial TV or VP debate. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz stunned watchers on Tuesday night's vice presidential debate as he nervously fidgeted. Yes, taking a lot of notes, looking down quite a bit. When he did look into the camera, it was very much like one viewer said, deer in headlights. This is just the optics of it. This has nothing to do with the politics of it. We're just talking about the actual debate itself. And because of really, I mean, it was before this as well, but with the Biden-Trump debate that ended Biden's 50-plus year career, I think optics have even taken a bigger role in what we're watching. A lot more practice, like we had noted at the time, that Kamala Harris in her debate almost seemed prepared by perhaps some of her Hollywood friends with some of her hand gestures and facial expressions. But he fidgeted, frowned, and even called himself a knucklehead, while his Republican counterpart, J.D. Vance of Ohio, gave a steady and lawyer-like presentation. and was widely seen as the victor. Now here's a question I posed to you if you watched it last night. Some were suggesting that Walz was underprepared, while others are suggesting he was overprepared. I would tend to think overprepared. It reminds me of a golfer when the golfer is told, okay, here's 8 steps before you take your swing. And you're trying to think of all those steps, and it causes you to screw up on numerous things, right? That's a little bit of what it looked like here, where that's why you saw some of the frowning, you saw some of the note-taking. Maybe an over-preparation that came off very underprepared. Now, they're saying largely good-natured? I would say that's fair. Featured the two candidates agreeing with each other repeatedly and expressing warm personal sentiments, avoiding the blistering personal attacks that were part of both presidential debates earlier this year. Yes, Walz did try to bring home that folksy demeanor, but he was noticeably nervous and misspoke repeatedly as he wrung his hands, took frantic notes, and his eyes darted around the CBS studio. Yes, the one viewer had pointed to the fact that he said he was friends with school shooters. He also had made some comment right out at the beginning about Israel and its proxies, clearly misstating, meaning Iran and its proxies. He said Walz expressed concern about the, quote, expansion of Israel and its proxies. Instead, he meant, you would assume, Iran and its proxies. He did ultimately say he would leave the final decision up to Israel. Walz still seemed nervous an hour later, declaring, "I become friends with school shooters," when he seemed to mean victims during an answer about gun control. The Democrats stumbled again in what it will be the most replayed moment of the debate when he was asked about fresh reporting that he lied about having been in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square massacre in the spring of 1989. Now, there's a couple important points on that, because Walz has a reputation for misspeaking, for lying, for, as Vance has called it in the past, stolen valor with his, what rank he was in the National Guard, et cetera, et cetera. So this was kind of a breaking story. Now, I disagree with the New York Post here when they say this will probably be the most replayed moment of the debate, because many of the outlets that I went to, the CNNs of the world, the ABCs, that was not a focus of the debate. Really, the focus was, for some reason, the mic being cut out on Vance, a little bit of a focus on January 6th and that response by Vance, but I did not see too many takeaways. There's a couple, but I didn't see that being the main takeaway from those in the mainstream media. But Walz said, if you did not watch it, I don't want to fall into the trap of doing all quotes, but he said, look, I'll be the first to tell you, I've poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times. But it's always been about those same people that elected me to Congress for 12 years. So Margaret Brennan pressed the governor, saying, Governor, just to follow up, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy? Walz, visibly shocked and dismayed by the blunt follow-up, because that does not happen. And that may be to that one viewer's point about the moderators being fair. That does not happen. It did not happen to Harris. It does not happen. Well, Walz really hasn't given too many VP interviews, which I think did him a great disservice, not to be prepared. If you look at J.D. Vance, he's been in front of so many hostile media types that, yes, I'm sure he was nervous last night, but this is nothing new for him. So he had the practice under his belt. But yes, I think Walz was visibly shocked that the media had the audacity, the moderator had the audacity to ask a follow-up. So he just said bluntly, I got there that summer and misspoke on this. Whew. So we're going to talk more about it. I'm running late, really late. Stay with us. We're just getting warmed up. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. A couple comments. Walz talked on the economy the least, and the subject for his number one was abortion. Yes, that's very clear. Many even saying that's the only time he really looked comfortable in the debate, because he's so used to talking about the abortion issue. Then great remarks by Vance. Censorship is the real threat to democracy. The media controls the viewer's mind control. Walz writing down notes to keep up with Vance. Yeah, that was interesting, wasn't it? I'm not perfect. I'm a knucklehead, he said at times. And that was in response to the Tiananmen Square kind of breaking story that he lied about that. Okay, Vance was put down on free speech on calling out fact check that made Walz look like a football coach with Walz yelling, "Timeout, timeout." He cannot say the truth, so he got timeout as CBS turned off Vance's mic, so censorship of his free speech. How many times would they turn Frankly Speaking off? I bet a lot. Keep on speaking out on Frankly Speaking. Thank you very much for the comment. Another comment. CBS won't be able to get away from the fact that it was 3-on-1 again. Vance didn't take the twisted thoughts of the moderators the way they had hoped he would. He didn't take any type of bait. I will say, I thought, yeah, they cut off his mic, but I thought that was actually very effective for him, because I thought it made the moderator again come off as kind of petty, really fact-checking him for no reason, because what he was saying was factually accurate. But see, they realized, and remember, they admitted this. Now, that was on ABC, but ABC admitted it, that they had practiced for certain fact checks because Biden did such a horrible job that they wanted to make sure that Harris landed some of the punches that maybe she wasn't prepared to land. So they were willing to do that job for her, essentially. I'm paraphrasing what they said, obviously, but that's what they insinuated. So I think that was a scenario there where there's a few times where they were ready to try to push Walz along. Now, according to Frank Luntz, the pollster, you know Frank Luntz, that in a 14-person focus group of undecided voters across 7 battleground states, 12 of the 14 concluded that Vance won the debate. Now, commentators kind of had a similar assessment. Dave Wasserman from Cook Political Report said Democrats are fortunate presidential debates tend to matter a lot more than VP debates. The Washington Post columnist Josh Rogan tweeting out, Walz looks rusty and nervous. Maybe he should have done some press interviews to better prepare. Others saying similar. 15 minutes in, and it's clear that Walz not doing interviews was a big mistake. He's nervous, and JD is comfortable because he's been doing adversarial interviews a day, every day since he was picked. Yeah, that's why I was very confident last night that JD Vance wasn't going to lose his cool, because this is typical for JD Vance. That 3 against 1. If you watch one of his rallies at the end, he takes press questions. If you look at any interview that he's done on Sunday morning shows or whatever outlet other than Fox, it is a hostile interview. So he was ready for it, because it's very often like he is in, and I said this on the program yesterday, he's in a debate with the host of the show. Chris Cillizza, formerly of CNN and MSNBC, said Vance is winning the debate. He is clearly the best debater of the 4 candidates running for president or vice president. His abortion answer and pivot was masterful. Walz has been fine but uneven. His answer on the lie that he was in China during Tiananmen Square was awful. It was interesting, and they note this, Emma Colton noted this, that Walz was visibly shaky as he said the world needs steady leadership. That was pretty interesting. That's a pretty interesting takeaway. So visibly shaky, Tim Walz, as he tells us that the world needs steady leadership. And I know, giving that kind of the spin room interviews afterwards, Vance said that he was nervous. I think he said out of 1 out of 10, he was 11. You could not tell. I mean, very cool, calm, and collected. But it also helps, I think, to kind of ease your nervousness when Walz says things like concerned about Israel and their proxies, or when he says he's become friends with school shooters, even though that was much later in the debate. You can see the nerves right from the beginning with Walz, and that, in a debate format, that kind of puts you at a little bit of ease. But what he has said, if you didn't watch it, and again, I'm not falling into the trap of just reading quotes, but I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Frank Luntz, who I quote here again, said, I'd become friends with school shooters, maybe the worst line in any 2024 debate. Again, I go back to Chris Cillizza. I think the answer about Tiananmen Square was awful. I think someone, and I don't remember, you're watching the various shows after, and I think someone had a very good point, and maybe it is in this. Oh, yes, it is. Okay. Guy Benson from Fox said, see, this is useful. Walz says he's become friends with school shooters when he meant victims. It is an innocent misstatement. Repeatedly lying about his military rank, his DUI, IVF, and Hong Kong Tiananmen Square are not innocent misstatements. I thought that was a wonderful point. Because yes, okay, you watch that and you go, wow, that's a big goof, what he said. But it's a misstatement. But what isn't a misstatement is when he was talking about his military rank, his DUI, which, if you recall, the media has not really talked about that in quite some time. And the lies that were told around the time of his congressional campaign and his gubernatorial campaign about that DUI. But I'll continue. IVF and his Hong Kong Tiananmen Square comments, those are not innocent misstatements. I thought that was a very good point. Others saying similar. Andrew McCarthy saying Walz obviously misspoke. He didn't mean he'd become friends with school shooters. Come on. This is a good high-minded debate as things go these days. Let's not make up stuff. He did not quite word it like that. So it's not even about the people that are kind of laughing about that. I have to agree with Guy Benson. It's just a misstatement. But what's not a misstatement is numerous lies about his past. So your thoughts. I have probably 10 articles here about 5 takeaways, 10 takeaways. Every outlet likes to do the takeaways. But most importantly, what's your takeaway? What did you think of last night's vice presidential debate? I'd love to hear from you. But stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. I'm your host, Frank Akam. This is Frankly Speaking. We're talking about the vice presidential debate. A few comments from viewers. Good morning, Frank. Well, good morning. Let's add that there. Love your show. Hey, and political commentary Monday through Friday. Have an awesome day. Well, you too. You have an awesome day as well. That's very kind of you. What a great way to start off my morning, which was a long night, early morning, wasn't it? These debates at 9 o'clock. My goodness. Okay, next up, a different comment from a different viewer. Tim Walz showed the Democratic platform in his closing statement perfectly when he said that they had the endorsement of Taylor Swift. What is more important for the future of America than that? He was outclassed by J.D. Vance the entire night. I thought that was another weird statement. And you know that was a canned, prepared statement, too, about the coalition that Kamala Harris has formed. Now, what I also find interesting about that is he dropped that in there, knowing that a lot of people would watch the debate, perhaps thinking that they wouldn't already realize that Taylor Swift and endorse them, trying to get some more people on the Swift side, I guess. I don't know. Another comment from a different viewer. I thought Vance's comments that we need common sense, which Trump has in the White House, was brilliant. He had a couple of really good lines. Vance did. And Walz just, I guess, a lot of it going back to the person who compared it to Biden, which I don't think it was as bad as Biden, obviously. But he became distracting to where you sometimes couldn't hear the message of what he was saying or the message sometimes of what Vance was saying. But yes, to that viewer's point, he said at the end, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country and one where our politics can be better than it is. I got to say, don't you find that interesting? What do you think if you're Dick Cheney? Now, I know, Dick Cheney endorsed Harris, probably at the urging of his daughter, Liz Cheney. Does it bother you to be thrown, if you're Dick Cheney, spent a career as a Republican, was in the George W. Bush administration, does it bother you to be lumped in with a Bernie Sanders? Because you are now. I mean, I would think, whatever you say about Trump, I would think that would make you uncomfortable, kind of being used by the Democratic VP. That's what it feels like to me. But people are saying on commentary from the media, but also online, about the uncomfortable appearance of Tim Walz. Even Meghan McCain, and we've got a list later on of what you would not call Republican-friendly Republicans and what they had to say about their performance. But Meghan McCain said, Walz is so uncomfortable, it's hard to watch. Ex-Rolling Stone editor-in-chief Noah Shaman described the Minnesota governor as talking like he's listing the side effects of a heart drug. That's actually a pretty good way of putting it. I've never seen a national candidate look as nervous as Tim Walz when he's not speaking, said Rich Lowry. That's a really good takeaway as well. Listen, you can sometimes tell there's a little nerves there. A lot of times when there's a walking over, the handshaking, those type of things. But Walz stayed consistently nervous, distractingly nervous throughout the whole time. And remember, he's been in politics for 20 years. This is not his first debate. So when they were saying to kind of lower the bar, and a lot of people said it was a nice try, and now we can see why they tried to lower the bar. But when they lowered the bar, we all said, and like I mentioned yesterday, I was on that Trump campaign call, and they said, no, Walz has been in politics 20 years. We don't take him lightly. But to see a candidate looking that nervous is kind of shocking. To quote Rich Lowry, I've never seen a national candidate look as nervous as Tim Walz when he's not speaking. And I like that some are calling it out as well. If maybe you did more interviews, the VP should be going to Fox News. They should be going to even the outlets that are going to be friendly. That's why, and you could see the anger in his eyes when he got pushback in a question from the moderator asking him to answer about Tiananmen Square. Because I'm sure they were told ahead of time, number one, that won't come up. Or if it does, don't worry, just give some nonsense answer and they'll let it go. They'll drop it because that's historically what they do. Kamala Harris had it happen to her during the presidential debate, during interviews, et cetera, et cetera. So that was very kind of fascinating. Most lopsided vice presidential debate ever, assessed California GOP Representative Darrell Issa. J.D. Vance was on his game. Tim Walz was nervous, uninformed, and didn't explain why he lies all the time. Now, again, like Trump's advisor said, Walz is very good at debate. So we were coming in prepared, and that's why I think you saw such a prepared and buttoned up J.D. Vance, who never once seemed nervous or uncomfortable up there. I think he was angry at the fact check about the fact check. As someone put it so succinctly, they don't like it when the fact checker gets fact checked. And that's why they censored his mic, which, again, they said that they reserved the right. And we knew, and we talked about the red flags of that. When they said they reserved the right to cut off the mics, you knew that was going to happen, and you knew it was going to go one direction, right? But the liberal media has even panned Tim Walz's debate performance. I think very disappointed in his performance because, let's face it, he's been a somewhat disappointing candidate for the Democrats from the beginning. When it started coming out about his lies about his background, there was some concern. When you saw that he wasn't going to do interviews like Harris, and when he did, the folksy thing kind of, after a while, gets a little old. I don't think he's been some, originally those in the media were saying J.D. Vance, worst VP pick in history. Well, I would ask then, what did you think last night? Do you still agree with that assessment? I would ask that question to anyone who felt that about J.D. Vance. But ABC News anchor Lindsay Davis actually said this, quote, "It kind of reminded me of the June 27th debate when Kamala Harris that night said of Joe Biden, it was a slow start but a strong finish. And that's how I felt Tim Walz kind of did tonight." So you don't want, no offense to anybody, but you don't want your debate performance to be compared to that of Joe Biden in the debate that ended his 50-plus year political career, ending his re-election campaign for president of the United States. I don't think that's a comparison. If you're Harris's campaign team this morning, that's not the comparison you're hoping to see. Davis, by the way, who alongside David Muir moderated the September debate. That's who I referenced when I said that about Lindsay Davis. She also went on to say that that Vance was more effective at hitting Harris than Trump was last month. I felt like that he was really effective. To use Tim Walz's his own words. I mean, a lot about this debate tonight was weird. There were comfortable, cringy moments, but overall, my take on this was that J.D. Vance needed to come away as the humble, likable guy from Hillbilly Elegy. It seemed like he did perhaps get some points in that. So you can't give him the complete victory. See, the mainstream media's got to say, give some points, but not give the full takeaway of a victory. Abby Phillips from CNN said, "I think there was a clear lack of preparation and execution here," meaning Tim Walz's performance. Dana Bash saying, "I think he had too much preparation. He had so many lines that he was clearly trying to say. I think the lack of interviews that he has done with national media, with local media, it showed he needed more." And again, I'm glad that is occasionally halting too, is what the New York Times called it. I think that's a huge takeaway from last night. When you do as many interviews, and especially in hostile territory like J.D. Vance has, it only prepares you and preps you for this. All right, we got to take a short break because I'm running late again. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox, your comments when we come back. And we are back with Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on historic Market Street in Corning. So many comments coming in. I love this. All right, let's get right to them. I like the, and thank you for the person who sent me that Facebook post. I will check that out. I like your comparison, though, that right now America feels like Andy is out of town and Barney is in charge. Nice. Anytime you got an Andy Griffith reference, I like that, because a question the viewer asks is, who was in charge on October 7th? As Israel is in war currently. Remember who was in charge on October 7th, meaning here in the United States, and that, of course, Biden-Harris. Remember, Harris said we have no troops in harm's way anywhere. Thank you for that comment. All right, some more comments coming in. A lot of waves coming in this morning, too. When Vance quoted the Minnesota abortion bill that Waltz said he was so proud of passing, he cornered Walz 3 times about it, asking him to defend what the bill says. All Walz could do was say it wasn't true. He was a deer caught in headlights almost all night. Yes, even when he wasn't giving an answer. That, again, the distracting point to Davis's from ABC News, her point that reminded her of Biden's performance. It wasn't as bad as Biden's performance, but the distraction that you ended up looking at Biden more, not even necessarily listening to what Trump said, because you're just going, my goodness. That happened quite a few times with Walz as well. Continuing, frankly speaking, I had a busy day and fell asleep and missed the vice presidential debate. Thank you for keeping us up to date. Well, you're welcome. I can't blame you. It is a long day. 9 o'clock is, well, I get it. We'll have to start doing the show from the West Coast, I guess. I wonder if Tim will ask for a rematch. Great question. I don't know. I could see him asking for a rematch, but I don't see a scenario where they have 2 VP debates and only 1 presidential debate. So they may just leave well enough be on this one. They may encourage Walz to do more interviews, because he's been even more quiet, if you can believe this, than Harris. Because at least Harris has been doing some local interviews and the like. Walz has been pretty much MIA. And finally, good morning, Frank. Well, good morning. Dishonest politicians like Tim Walz has been revealed. Wake up and vote accordingly by Steuben County family and friends. Let me word that again, because I waved. Good morning, Frank. Good morning. Dishonest politicians like Tim Walz have been revealed. Wake up and vote accordingly by Steuben County family and friends. Thank you, Frank, for keeping us informed. Well, thank you for watching, and thank you for all the great comments and waves coming in. I also think, David Axelrod, even admitting, David Axelrod worked for Barack Obama, senior advisor to Barack Obama, and also he is now a CNN senior political commentator. Axelrod said that Walz did have a strong moment while talking about the 2020 election and democracy, and it was made more powerful when he turned to Vance and said, did he lose the election? And Vance wouldn't answer the question. I thought that was damning. Then he added, the Tiananmen Square answer would have been best delivered in Chinese for as understandable as it wasn't. The first answer on the Middle East was he was nervous, and it showed. But on healthcare, on abortion rights, he can all of us, old debaters, can pick apart his technique. But I think he got the message across and people heard it. So I think Vance was by far the more polished performer, but in some ways, maybe being too polished is a problem as well. I think Walz came across as very genuine. All right, we got to take a short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio, and joining me in that studio is Family Court Judge Mary Tarantelli. Thanks so much for being on the show this morning.
Thanks for having me, Frank.
All right, let's get right to it, because I always have to do the disclaimer just so people know. Because you are running for judge, I have to be a little bit more generic with my questions. You know that, but just for the viewer. So that's why I'm not going to get into minutia and very specific. So let's start with the easy one. Tell us about your background.
Born and raised in Chemung County. I went away to school, obviously,
Sure.
since Chemung County doesn't have many colleges, and
Sure.
it definitely doesn't have a law school. But I went away, and when I came back to the area, the intention was always to come back and practice law with my father. He had a firm here,
Yeah.
and he primarily specialized in family law. So when I was in law school, that was my focus. And when I came back, I did that. I represented mostly children, but I also represented grandparents, parents, in a small law firm in Chemung County. And I continued with that for about 10 years, as well as being an assistant prosecutor with the district attorney's office.
Okay.
After that, the next transition really naturally was to take the bench. And so I became family court judge about 10 years ago. And in doing that, we did a lot of really great things over the last 10 years, but we're not done yet.
Sure.
So when my term was coming due, I knew that I wanted to run again and continue what we have going on.
So you've been doing this for nearly 10 years. When you first got into it, is it anything like you expected it to be?
Yes, because I
'Cause you've kind of
lived
been-
in family court.
Right.
I was in front of all three judges daily, all day long for 15 years.
Sure.
So it really wasn't a huge change, and also because I represented children, I was used to being kind of in the middle of moms and dads or grandparents and parents.
Sure.
Because I would hear all sides when forming a position and assisting my young clients.
And I would normally ask why you decided to run, but you kind of gave that away by saying that, you know, you've had nearly 10 years and there's more work to be done. What things would you like to see in the next 10 years?
Well, some things that we've started is Chemung County was kind of the forgotten county in our judicial district. We have 10 counties within our judicial district. Broome County usually got the highlights. A bigger county. They were better funded. They had more judges. And so the go-to positions were usually provided to Broome County representatives. Tompkins was considered the intellectual hub, and they received that credit. In Chemung County, though, we did a lot of work, good work, but just never got the highlights. And we've kind of collaborated with the different parts within the court system. Because of that, we've done really well, and we've received attention. And because of that, then, I've been appointed and acted as the supervising family court judge for the 10 counties, which is a rare thing. I don't think Chemung County's had one of those in at least 3 or 4 decades.
No.
But it means that I have a seat at the table when we're talking policy, procedures, infrastructure within the courts, well, at least the 6th Judicial District. And so that's been huge. Additionally, I have been appointed acting Supreme Court judge, which means Chemung County has an additional Supreme Court judge, which is also a bonus. But the problem is that doesn't just naturally go to any candidate. If I continue on, I'll keep those positions. If I don't, it can't go to one of the other judges because there are some requirements, plus you have to be appointed. And the new judge is not going to be appointed to those positions.
And this kind of is unique because you've had the last 10 years, and what a wild kind of 10 years it's been. And I know this is a weird question maybe to ask, but I think people are kind of fascinated about it. How was everything affected when COVID hit? How did it change? We all know it changed our lives in a way, but in the courts it became so much more difficult, didn't it?
Well, so we're the workhorse court.
Yeah.
We're not a fancy court. You know, we're the old beat up suburban court.
Yeah.
And so family court, we were used to doing whatever we needed to do to keep the docket moving. And so it was harder for us because we have a bigger docket than most courts. And families tend to struggle more in times of need like that.
Sure.
The priorities that are there for families are different than the other kinds of courts. Criminal courts put everything on hold, sort of. We kept chugging along.
Wow.
At one point, I had my cell phone, my secretary's cell phone, my court attorney's cell phone. We were making calls. We were trying to keep things moving. And so we sort of MacGyvered it. Maybe I'm dating myself.
No.
But we did what we needed to do. And so while we struggled, we were the court that knew you do what you have to do.
Sure.
So when the state came in and told the other courts, you need to start doing this to get things moving, and we're going to do this, and they were implementing new things such as teams and different protocols. They were getting rid of notarization on documents, those sorts of things. We kind of been running. So
Isn't that interesting?
yeah, so it worked okay.
Because a lot of places had a lot of catch up to do.
They sure did. And I think that's another reason why we were highlighted in a positive way at the state level. Chemung County was known as keeping things moving.
So let's talk a little bit about the race for those that aren't familiar, because there's other races going on that maybe they're not paying attention to the judges' race as much as they should.
Oh,
so
Frank, come on, this is everybody's highlight.
I know. So tell us what the race itself looks like for those that maybe aren't familiar before, because early voting is coming up in 20 days, 25 days. So
Yeah, very soon.
crazy.
So there, traditionally family court, there was one designated family court judge in Chemung County. Last year, the governor did sign the bill. It had been proposed 14 years ago, it had been proposed again maybe 10 years ago, and then last year proposed that there would be an additional family court judge for Chemung County. Okay. And the governor did this time sign the bill, and so here now we have 2 full-time family court positions.
Oh, okay.
Mine is up because my term is up, and we have the second position. However, the way it is, they're not designated separate ballots. So 3 candidates are running for 2 positions.
Oh, okay. And you can, oh, that's interesting. Okay. And is this the first time for 2, you're saying?
Well, Supreme Court has traditionally had this happen. It's just the dynamic of Supreme Court because they cover several counties typically. But for family court here in Chemung County, yes, because it's a new position.
Yeah, that's
and it just happened to fall when my term was.
Lucky you, right?
Yes, lucky
me. That's great. So I'm sure you're talking to voters and you're doing all the things that as the campaign winds down here. What are people saying to you specifically when they talk about family court and family court, you as family court judge?
Well, interestingly enough, there are a lot of people that don't ever really experience family court, which I'm glad for.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they use their church, they use their own families instead of court intervention to resolve problems, and that's wonderful. But a lot of people don't. So sometimes they really just want to talk party.
Sure.
And I have to explain to them that
that's why I do
I've
the disclaimer.
I've been in a cave for 10 years because judges aren't allowed to be political during when they preside on the bench. It's only during election year. But another piece that they want to talk about is there a bias, dads versus moms? That's a huge one.
Sure.
Grandparent rights, those come up a lot. Homelessness and how that affects, because that's kind of in the forefront for everybody, homelessness, and that the population that seems to be accumulating. So that's come up quite a bit.
And because it doesn't matter what candidate that we have on, that is a major issue.
It does, and it does impact. It does impact families.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Now, what issues do you think you'll face coming in the next 10 years? And I know we brought up COVID, nothing like that. We're just saying, what do you think are going to be the biggest issues? Probably continue.
Trying to make the available resources that we have in our community work, because there's a real backlog when it comes to mental health. The substance disorders, the problem with those is we don't really have good step-down programs, and so we're having folks avail themselves of the treatment, and then they're going right back to it because they don't have the resources, the step-down programs to carry them through.
And I'm sure that comes up with nearly anybody I talk to as well. I mean, just the fentanyl and just the drug epidemic in general, it's heartbreaking, and it affects all of us.
It sure does.
That's what's so sad. So just before we go, I know it's a little different because it is a judicial candidacy. How can people help? How can people find out more?
Well, so I have a website,
okay.
And it's Reelect Tarantelli, Judge Tarantelli, and that gives you my background. It talks about family court itself. It talks about some of the other things. How can people help? Well, put out signs, get a hold of us, we deliver. We have bumper stickers. But just ask questions. I think you'll find that I have 25 years of experience, and if anyone has a question about family court, guess who gets the call?
Right. Well,
I do.
Yeah,
and it's not just this county, it's 10 counties wide. So ask the questions, you'll get the answers, and I think you'll feel more comfortable with the vote.
Isn't that great? So do you work pretty closely then with other counties? You guys
I do, because I supervise those family court judges.
Oh, that's great.
So if they have an issue, I get the call.
And right before we go, what do you say to voters before they head in either early voting or November the 5th?
Well, you brought up early voting, and it is a gem.
Yeah.
So if you can do it, it is user-friendly. We have 2 spots in Chemung County, the fairgrounds, and actually at the Board of Elections. So go do it. Do it at your convenience. But you do want to get out and vote.
Yes.
Not only because of my race, but also because it is a presidential election.
It is. It's a big year. And I talked with the people at the Steuben County Board of Elections, and rest assured, you still get the I voted sticker, even if you vote early.
Very important.
That's the most. That's why I think many people do it, right? Well, thanks.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for being on the show. If you want to do this again before November 5th, I'd love to have you on.
Well, I'd love to be back.
All right.
Let me know.
All right. We'll be right back with
Thanks,
Frankly
Frank.
Speaking. Stay with us.
Right.
And we are back. Just reading through all these comments, and thank you again. Oh, wow. Yep, thank you, Ken. I just saw your comment. We are going to hear from Ken and see what he has to say about last night's debate. Wow, so many great comments. We'll do that at the top of the hour. I want to thank Mary Tarantelli for being on the program this morning, family court judge currently, and candidate for family court judge. Appreciate her being on the program. A lot of waves coming in. We've got a few comments. I'll get to yours in a second, Ken, at the top of the hour. Good morning, Frank. Well, hey, good morning. I watched the debate and thought both candidates were far more presidential than either presidential candidate. Now, you're the second or third person who has said that this morning. That's very interesting. The one takeaway was Walz was an immigration apologist, as if illegal immigrants or those non-citizens deserve more than American citizens. Thank you very much. Another comment. The first time I voted for Trump, I didn't like either candidate, but I did like Mike Pence. and that's why I voted for Trump. So VP doesn't make a difference. That's what a lot of people say. I think this one may have, this debate anyway, may have a little more significance because there's so little opportunity to see Harris and Walz perform. Now, you know what you're getting with Trump. He was president for 4 years. You have an idea of what you're going to get with Harris because it's going to be either her positions when she ran for president in 2019 or the policies of the Biden-Harris administration. But with Vance, he's been giving a lot of interviews. Harris and Walz have been giving essentially no interviews, no press conferences, which I think was detrimental to Walz yesterday. So this one's a little more unique because there's not more debates. There's been one debate between Harris and Trump, as you know, and one debate now with the vice presidential nominees. So I think there's probably, it'll be interesting to see the final numbers when it comes to ratings, but I think it was probably heavily watched. Will it make a difference? I will say, when you have Trump and so many people are critical, whatever you think of him, critical of kind of his New York City style, we'll say, kind of that in-your-face style. If you watched last night and you were on the fence over Trump, you might be able to say, well, you know what, J.D. Vance, cool, calm, and collected. So something to keep in mind. But yes, we got a lot of comments coming in. Thank you so much. And thank you again to Family Court Judge Mary Tarantelli. Like I said, I love having all candidates on. Judge races, it's so odd when you think about it. For 10 years, they cannot be political. And then they have, during a campaign season, they could be political. But at the same time, I couldn't ask specific, positions on things because she could have a case, for instance, that has that involved in it. So it's just, it's tough. And that's why I'm always glad that judges trust me to come on the program and know that I'm not going to paint them in a corner where they say I can't answer, because no candidate ever wants to say that. It looks awkward. But there are a lot of things judge candidates cannot answer. So she did a great job. I appreciate her being on the program. Don't forget, tomorrow on the show, we'll be talking with, perfect timing, right, to talk about this debate. We'll be talking with former Congressman, current Assembly candidate, and current Steuben County Republican Chairman Joe Sempolinski. He's going to be our guest starting at 7 o'clock tomorrow, so do not miss that. I know he is a fan favorite. And speaking of fan favorites, we've got Ken's reaction to the debate. When we come back, a lot more commentary in that regard. What do you think? I think most outlets, even those you would call far left, have said Walz was shaky. I do like that the media is finally calling him and saying, see, you should have done more national media. You should have done more interviews, even local interviews, to prepare. Because to Rich Lowry's point, I have never seen a national candidate look that nervous and uncomfortable in a debate. And debates are nerve-wracking, don't get me wrong, but that was distracting. But we'll talk more about it when we come back. Stay with us. This is, frankly speaking, our number one in the books, our number two in mere moments. Hour number two of Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. We're, needless to say, talking about the vice presidential debate. Did you stay up for it? What were your thoughts? Thank you for all the comments. A lot of great comments coming in. Let's get right to them. We'll have Ken's in just a moment. First comment, enjoyed Judge Mary Tarantelli interview. Well, thank you. I thought she did a great job. I'm glad that she could be on the program. Next up, different comment. Frankly, last night we saw the result of the DNC's latent anti-Semitism in selecting Minnesota Governor Walz over Pennsylvania Governor Shapiro for VP candidate. Shapiro, clearly a superior overall choice with much better quote-unquote chops for debate, and it was bypassed because the DNC didn't want to alienate much of its core by having someone with the Jewish faith so close to the presidency. And you know who else said that? To this viewer's point, I know I've mentioned a lot, Van Jones, former Obama advisor, saying that the Democrat Party is now marbled, and I believe is in reference to Mr. Shapiro, Governor Shapiro not being picked, that the Democrat Party is marbled with anti-Semitism. So thank you for that wave coming in. All right, here's Ken. Ken stayed up and watched the debate. Is this the last, other than election night, is this the last late night presidentially for a while? Anyway, this is what Ken had to say. Frank, I tricked my wife into staying up for one more debate by telling her there was a special episode of Survivor airing after it. In hindsight, that may not have been my greatest idea. I hope you two, you happy couple, make it through this presidential race, for heaven's sakes. The debate was as anticlimactic as they get. If anyone watching was on the fence, they are still sitting there. You know what's interesting, if I could take a side note real quick, Ken? What I find interesting about that is it was a typical debate. Now, we're used to now the Trump-Hillary debates, the Trump-Biden debate, just threw Biden's career out the window. We're used to not the old-fashioned, turn on the presidential debate and sit back and try to hear policy, not always agree, those type of things. So I used to tell friends, especially those that didn't like Trump, I said, when Trump's gone, you're going to be bored with politics again. Because whether you like his style or not, the debates, you never know what you're going to get. Now, these are the kind of debates you used to get. But I'll continue. Walz recanted many of the lies that we have heard endless times from the Harris campaign. Recant, did I say recalled? No. Walz recanted many of the lies that we have heard endless times from the Harris campaign. A couple times after he gave a long, incoherent response, I was left scratching my head, wondering what he said. He didn't give any specifics on any of Harris's politics. I don't know if they have specifics. I'm not even saying that lightly. Harris isn't giving specifics either. But anyway, I guess all in all, he did what he was told to do. He demonized Trump. But he surprisingly stated that he agreed with Vance on several occasions. Harris and her handlers got that VP they wanted, someone that will do as they're told and not be perceived as smarter than Harris. Vance pointed out the many things that the Biden administration has screwed up since taking office. He constantly referred to it as the Harris administration to make sure everyone knew that she wasn't an innocent bystander during the past 3.5 years. I think Vance missed several opportunities to correct Walz's lies, like Trump being accused of pushing Project 2025 and not explaining that the border bill would not have fixed the border. It would have codified into law 5,000 illegals entering a day. Early on, the moderators were doing real-time fact-checking, which Vance called them out on, and surprisingly, they stopped after they took the opportunity to mute Vance's mic. Multiple times, Brennan seemed pleased with herself for asking Vance pointed questions about Trump. I was extremely surprised when O'Donnell re-asked a question on Tiananmen Square. Me too. And know who else was even more surprised, Ken? That was Mr. Walz, which forced Walz to admit he lied. All in all, it was clear that they were trying to trip Vance up while being kind of nicer to Walz. They were not as good as the moderators of the Trump-Biden debate and better than the moderators of the Trump-Harris debate. If I had to pick a winner, it would be Vance. He seemed more vice presidential. Thank you so much, Ken. Yes, I would say they're kind of in the middle of the moderators, though I think the fact-checking, it bothers me when the fact-checkers don't like being fact-checked. And that's exactly what Vance did, and that's when they shut off his mic. I also find, and I know I may be belaboring this point too much, I don't understand sometimes the long, drawn-out questions. Kind of distracting to me. I see we do have other comments coming in. Keep those comments coming in. I'll get to them after the break. But as I had mentioned, and you agree with this, Lindsay Davis, the ABC News host who was also the moderator at the last debate, very biased, in that she was the one that admitted that they practiced fact-checking just on Trump before the debate. But she said that Walz reminded her of the Biden flop, which even if it's not specifically saying he did as bad as Biden, you don't want that comparison made at all. One GOP strategist, Scott Jennings, who has been doing a great job on CNN, he's a CNN commentator. He's the one that highlighted the fact that Democrats have been in the White House 12 out of the last 16 years when they keep talking about not going back. But continuing, this is Scott Jennings saying about last night's debate, all I could think of was, man, Walz is so in over his head. I mean, can you imagine this guy sitting in the White House Situation Room with that facial expression that's like 50% sheer terror and 50% extreme bafflement? That's not too bad of a description, is it? The answer on why he lied about his trips to China and the Tiananmen Square thing was probably the worst VP debate meltdown since Stockdale in '92. Referring to Reform Party nominee James Stockdale, who famously opened the year's presidential debate by asking rhetorically, who am I? Why am I here? Continuing with Jennings, all the political media has told us that Vance was a terrible pick and Walz was going to bring in all these voters. That charade is now over. Walz does not belong at the level of American politics Vance does. Yeah, I would ask those people, who was it that said that J.D. Vance was the Dan Quayle of Sarah Palin, or they're trying to be humorous. I would wonder what they think now if you put the two and two together. I think Scott Jennings has a good point. We were told, because that's what the media does, that J.D. Vance was the worst, and this is going to hurt Trump, et cetera, et cetera. I think if you watched last night, I think it was Michael Goodwin who said it only boosts Trump even higher. But yeah, that Tiananmen Square, probably the worst VP debate meltdown since Stockdale. Interesting. But I like that with what he said, that Tim Walz being in the Situation Room, that the look on his face looks like 50% sheer terror and 50% extreme bafflement. But never, and going back to Rich Lowry's point, never at a national level have you, at least to me, unless you can point to someone else, never at a national level have you seen someone so nervous to be on that stage. Savannah Guthrie stated that Tim Walz has a rather progressive record on immigration and has supported benefits, including taxpayer-funded ones, for illegal immigrants in Minnesota. This was right before the debate. Tim Walz has a rather progressive record on immigration. Minnesota gave undocumented migrants driver's licenses, made them eligible for free college tuition, as well as state health insurance. How's that going to play in Arizona? Now, anti-Trump Republicans, the ones that are not looking to praise the Trump-Vance ticket in any way, shape, or form, they weighed in. How am I doing on time? They weighed in on last night's debate, which I found very interesting. David Frum, a former speechwriter for George W. Bush, said Vance is going home tonight with Walz's wallet. Wow, what a way to make a almost impossible sentence to say. Vance is going home tonight with Walz's wallet. Vance didn't even have to snatch it. Walz just handed it over, along with a bunch of unearned compliments to Vance's fine character. That was interesting. I guess both trying to show kind of a difference in the presidential debate, showing a nicer, happier side, I suppose, with each other, both Vance and Walz, but Walz specifically. You know, it was Bill Kristol said, it wasn't a good night when the best your allies can say on text or email is, don't worry, vice presidential debates don't matter. And that has been the trend. I'm not a big Bill Kristol fan in this scenario. Normally gets all of his predictions wrong. He actually was the one that said that Trump was going to be out before Iowa back in 2016. So it's very interesting to me that he still feels very confident to go out and make predictions. But yes, when that is kind of been the talking point, hey, he's still a nice guy, and VP debates don't matter, that's not a good sign of the performance. Meghan McCain said no one should ever say debates don't matter because Walz has done a lot of damage this evening. Meghan McCain saying. Leela Rose said J.D. Vance is so talented. It is extremely tragic that he is now defending abortion. This is a Trump influence. It is destroying the Republican Party. All right. There we go. We're reading all sides of things. We're getting all the news because yesterday, the vice presidential debate, if you missed it, CBS cut the mics and fact-checked J.D. Vance in a more civil VP debate, is how CNN put it, drawing the ire of Trump and his allies. Not the ire. I mean, listen, the civil debate was fine. It was kind of, it was nice. But the fact-checked, Margaret Brenner just fact-checked J.D. incorrectly on climate change. She incorrected a few times. So, yes, I can understand why they haven't been on the other side. Walz and Harris. And the people that were fine with the performance there, the fact checkers that is the new common trend. So they haven't been on that side, or they don't care because it always goes against one side. That's what makes it so frustrating. Now, Vance admits, and I thought this is what I meant to bring up earlier. What did you think about this? We're receiving so many comments this morning. That he admits his past opinions of Trump were wrong because he believed the media's lies. I thought that was a very interesting take on that. So we got to take a short break. Stay with us. Our first break of this hour, and then we'll be back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I want to thank again our friend Mary Tarantelli, family court judge in Chemung County, for being on the program this morning. All right, let's get back to comments from viewers. The long drawn-out questions were only directed at Vance. They tried to get him sidetracked so he would lose his train of thought. That's a very good thought there, because as I had mentioned earlier in the program a few times, that those long drawn out questions are kind of frustrating as someone who wants to hear from both candidates, but I'll continue. To show his intelligence ability, he was able to complete his thoughts and complete the distractions. They were able to make him occupy his time and not be able to probe some of the false accusations Walz made. 3 moderators tried but failed as being a deciding factor, other than proving the bias that they have. And I think that's probably pretty common at this point, common knowledge that I think even the mainstream media admits that there is this bias specifically with fact-checking. We got a couple other comments. Sorry. Okay, next comment. I can't think of a word for Walz's comment regarding Trump's age. Oh, good point. We haven't mentioned this yet. I think he said he was 80. Other than Walz was attempting to cast Trump in the same category as Biden. So the only word I could think of is that reference was shallow. Also, I bet those who had badmouthed Vance are now acting like an ostrich and burying their heads in the sand. Yes. And I think some of the people that we've already quoted today were some of those same people that said Vance was so bad. But what did you think about this, how Vance tried to kind of pivot from his past comments? Because we know they continue to hit on his comments that he made about Trump before he was obviously Trump's running mate. And he said that he was wrong because he believed the media's lies. I thought that was a very interesting way of putting it. Senator Vance in 2016, they asked your running mate Donald Trump, you called him unfit for the nation's highest office, et cetera, et cetera. So they gave him the opportunity to quote all those past comments, again, showing that bias. Quote from Vance. He said, well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open and sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've always been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest, fabrications of the record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he would be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. I thought that was a good way to pivot from some of those past comments and clarify the record to let them know why the change has occurred. So I thought that was very interesting. And I thought very effective as well. Also, I know we've been talking about the Tiananmen Square response by Tim Walz. What was your thought on that? Is it as devastating as some have said, some have claimed? It did not look good, but as I mentioned on this program, some are commenting on it, some are bearing it. We're going to get to some of these takeaways from the CNNs of the world, et cetera. But the New York Post editorial board highlighted the fact check. J.D. Vance was accurately describing the migrant crisis fueled by Kamala Harris and Joe Biden when CBS moderator Margaret Brennan decided to insert herself with a fact check. Quote, just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status. She said it very smugly, if you remember that point. That was early on in the debate. It's very frustrating because it looked like that would set the scene. Vance was rightly annoyed by the interruption and said the rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check. And since you're going to fact check me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called, and it goes on to the whole legalese. You heard it last night, and I'm glad. Then they cut off his mic. Then they had the audacity to cut off his mic. So this was an example of the fact checker being fact checked and not, of course, liking it. It was made all the more partisan by the face that when Governor Tim Walz told that the illegal border crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office, which is not even close to the truth, no one let out a peep. Some facts are too good to check. So that's why we continue to go back to the idea that fact checking only ever goes one way. And this was a prime example of it because Tim Walz actually had the audacity to say that illegal border crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. And there was no fact check there. Not to be left out, the New York Times posted that Vance's comments, quote, needed context. So just the typical there. Britt Humes from Fox News senior political analyst Britt Hume, said Vance was just fine. Seemed, in terms of his knowledge of policy, to run rings around poor Governor Walz, who I think did not have a very great night. Hume added that Walz got better as the night wore on, but if you're rating this debate on points, it wasn't close. Also going on to call the performances of moderators Nora O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan as obnoxious and made the debate a 3-on-1 proposition against Vance. So that's Britt Humes, and I know others have echoed that sentiment that have commented on the program this morning. that it was a 3-on-1 proposition, and I think that's why Vance was well suited for that. He's used to that from the Sunday talk shows and the various hostile interviews that he does, where that's why Walz was not prepared, specifically not prepared for that Tiananmen Square question. Not the question itself, but the follow-up where Norah O'Donnell said, I want you to clarify what you meant. And he was not expecting that because he hasn't been in that situation, nor would he really be in that situation if he was on the Sunday shows. But Vance has been in that on numerous occasions, as you've seen if you ever watch him do an interview or take questions from the press after one of his rallies. So some of the best and worst of the VP debate, Hank Scheinkoff, a Democrat campaign consultant, because we like to look at all sides and see what is being said about the performance, said these are the two of the most boring men in the world. It was Slick JD versus Cornball Tim. Vance did a better job because he hit the places where Democrats were weakest: inflation, cost, and the migrant crisis. Walz was a candidate of compassion. Vance was more polished. Walz got tongue-tied when he talked about the Middle East, but won the exchange on abortion. The Democrats' best moment was when he hit Trump and Vance hard over the January 6th riots. Vance couldn't explain child care and was off base on health care. Not a mention of Tiananmen Square. There's quite a few. You can find these for yourself. We'll have a couple other comments about the debate. We do have some other issues to get to as well, but we got to take a short break. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox. We'll be right back. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. Thank you so much for joining us. So many comments coming in. But first, I want to look at the takeaways from some various outlets because a lot of people are pointing to the Tiananmen Square statement by Walz as being one of the biggest takeaways. Will that always be the case? Well, the biggest takeaway from CNN was Vance dodges on January 6th. Then they said another takeaway is Midwestern nice up to a point. There's no name calling, few canned zingers, and a clear directive for both Vance and Walz not to get personal unless they were aggressively agreeing that the issues were in fact issues. Instead of jousting among themselves, Vance and Walz behaved agreeably in the service of trying to depict the respective presidential candidates as uniquely divisive or misguided. Okay. Springfield pet eating claims feature an immigration clash. Walz says he misspoke. Okay, so his takeaway number 4 on page 6. Walz says he misspoke about his presence at Tiananmen Square. When asked about the reports and the discrepancy, a Harris campaign spokesman said there was likely closer to 15 times. Let me take a step back. Think about this. New reporting by Minnesota Public Radio News and APM reports in the lead up to Tuesday's debate called into questions Walz's claims about how frequently he traveled to China, which he had previously said was as many as about 30 times. Reports contradicted those claims, and specifically whether the Minnesota governor was in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square protest in 1989. When asked about the reports and the discrepancy, a Harris campaign spokesman said it was likely closer to 15 times. And when asked directly during the debate, Walz filibustered, first describing his upbringing and rise in electoral politics before conceding that he can sometimes get caught up in the moment, be a knucklehead, and said he misspoke. Vance didn't seek to directly capitalize on Walz's concession, but alluded to it in a different question shortly thereafter, saying when you misspeak, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. Was also the fact that he only really ever said that he quote-unquote misspoke is because they had the audacity to come back and ask him the follow-up question. Another takeaway was a dividing line over abortion, conversation on gun control, and scrutinizing Trump's concepts of a plan on health care. Okay. So you can see CNN thinking it went more, I guess, in Walz's direction. Fox News said that Vance and Walz vice presidential debate ends with both candidates touting a new future. That Walz repeats as Georgia's abortion death falsehood, decried by doctors as fear-mongering. To be sure, the pundits will be vetting what the candidates said or didn't say about immigration and abortion, two topics on which they disagree vehemently, but the two vice presidential candidates were largely repeating and underscoring what the respective nominees have said and believe. The key now is for the media to focus on what the American people want and require as the extraordinary race comes down to the finish line. J.D. Vance reminds CBS moderators of debate rules after they try to fact-check him. We mentioned that all morning. So those are some of the major takeaways. if you want to look at it, that's what Liz Peek had to say, that Kamala Harris makes a desperate move on a. Well, let me try to take a step back. Because I'm trying to find the exact one that. Okay, so they keep talking about the fact checking. They keep talking about the fear mongering. Where was the other one? In a show of compassion, Vance tells Walz he is sorry that his son witnessed a shooting. 3, Vance says he thinks Walz wants to solve the border crisis, but Kamala Harris doesn't, which I'm not sure about that. Walz claims there would be pregnancy registry in Trump-Vance administration, but Vance pushed back. And 5, Walz refers to his frequent note-taking, which was mocked by Trump. Walz referred back to his notes in one answer on Tuesday night after frequently scribbling down observations to the point of distraction, really, saying, I made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted, he listed. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have to have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. Even Trump poked fun at the noticeable amount of notes, saying Walz is taking so many notes. Never seen a candidate take more. He needs the notes to keep his brain intact. So there's a couple of quick takeaways. I don't want to run too late here in this segment. We do have some other things hopefully to get to before the end of the program. But again, what were your thoughts? They talked about the 5 clashes. Again, it goes back to where to me, it's kind of reminds me of an old debate, meaning a pre-Trump debate, if you will, where it was more buttoned up, so to speak. That it was more, what's the word, normal in the body politics, meaning in politics. It was more typical of what we would have seen in the past. So some GOP lawmakers and leaders reacted to the debate. Specifically, Tom Emmer, who I had mentioned, I was in on that call with him in the Trump campaign, and he was I learned at that time that he was a person that was emulating Walz for debate preparation with Vance. He said Tim Walz is as radical as they come on the issue of immigration. As governor of Minnesota, he supported free health care, free college tuition, and driver's licenses for illegal immigrants. Innocent Americans have been assaulted and murdered because of his border crisis. Tom Cotton saying Tim Walz's answer on Israel was incomprehensible. Like Kamala, Walz has no idea what he is talking about. Kamala and Walz would make the chaos in the Middle East worse. Iran rained missiles down. This is Tim Murtaugh from the Trump campaign. Iran rained missiles down on Israel today, 1,350 days into Kamala Harris's tenure as vice president. So naturally, Tim Walz says it's Donald Trump's fault. And that was a very good point. 1,350 days into Kamala Harris's tenure, and so naturally it's Donald Trump's fault. JD knocks out of the park with the first question, said Elise Stefanik, who's the New York representative who was on the short list for VP. JD knocks out of the park with his first question. Tim Walz explodes on first question in presentation, communication, and substance. Have you, and I know asking this question, have you seen a national political debate or interview or anything to this level with a national candidate that did look so nervous? That kind of sticks in my head because it became a distraction. So it's interesting that so many people were able to write such brilliant kind of exposés on what they saw last night. He is better, Donald Trump Jr. wrote, he is better in our toughest issues than most Republicans are on our best issues. I told you so, meaning J.D. Vance. He was. I mean, that was a very good debate performance. But again, he has been so practiced on it, so prepared for it because he is used to the 3-on-1. He is used to the media going after him. He's actually at home, unfortunately. That's how bad it becomes for Republican candidates. He's at home in that situation. Now, Michael Goodwin, and I've been hinting towards this all morning. When we come back, we'll hear what he had to say. We are going to get away from this after that, unless your comments, because we do have quite a few other things I want to get to before we call it a day. We've got about half an hour left. But if you want to continue to talk about the VP debate, I know we talked a little bit about Israel. I want to recap on that. But if you want to talk about that, please, by all means, let me know what your takeaways were. I don't care about CNN's or any of the other outlets' takeaways. It's your takeaways. So I'd love to hear from you. Now, stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Short break, and then we'll hear your comments. A lot of them coming in, so stay with us. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. Thank you for joining us. A couple of comments from viewers. One being a good morning from Keuka Lake, and thank you very much. Let's look at that picture from Frankly Speaking viewers live at Keuka Lake. Thank you. Looks like a beautiful morning. And they also suggesting that J.D. Vance was the winner. So beautiful picture. Thank you very much. Also, another comment. Where was this other comment? I thought Vance's points regarding the economists being wrong several times over the years prior was great. Yes, there was quite a few takeaway quotes from, I think, J.D. Vance that will kind of stick in people's mind. Here's a comment from a viewer. Good morning, Frank. Well, good morning. Tim Walz was nervous because he is a narcissistic individual. Interesting. It was definitely nerves like I've never seen at the national level. And the fact of the matter is, about an hour in, it still hadn't calmed down. Really, where I want to say he looked most at home and most comfortable in his own skin was on the abortion issue, because that is a topic that they talk about extensively. And so many pundits suggesting that maybe he wouldn't have been as nervous if he was doing those interviews, if he was actually going out and speaking to the media, doing press conferences, so it left him a little ill-prepared. One quick announcement that I want to make, a news story here, and then we'll get right back into the debate, but I don't want to forget this before the morning's over. Congressman Nick Langworthy has released a statement that they announced $100,000 in federal funding for Chemung Schuyler's Steuben Workforce New York Healthcare Career Programs. It's a mouthful, but receiving $100,000, saying investing in our healthcare workforce is essential to filling current talent gaps, as well as the long-term well-being of our region. The new funding will allow CSS Workforce New York to expand its efforts to recruiting and training healthcare professionals, ensuring that our local hospitals and clinics have the skilled personnel they need to provide quality care. I am always proud to support workforce initiatives that open new doors to career opportunities in high-demand fields like healthcare. Thank you to Congressman Nick Langworthy for this statement. Phyllis Balliet, Executive Director of Chemung Schuyler Steuben Workforce New York, said this grant will be instrumental in expanding our workforce training program, which provides critical training and job placement opportunities for individuals looking to enter the healthcare field. With additional resources, we can better support our community healthcare needs and contribute to the region's overall economic health. We are grateful to Congressman Langworthy for his commitment to bolstering the Southern Tier's workforce and his advocacy in securing this funding. Okay, so J.D. Vance, I know I've been saying all morning I was going to mention this. Michael Goodwin from the New York Post said, in the days leading up to Tuesday's debate, Democrats went out of their way to say they were nervous about how Governor Tim Walz would perform. And if you recall, we talked about it on the program yesterday, releasing a statement saying that he's nervous. And that came off yesterday. It was an obvious effort to lower expectations in the hopes that Walz would beat the gloomy forecasts and thus look like an upset winner. They didn't lower expectations far enough. Walz had occasional moments of clarity, but he spent most of the night giving rambling answers that filled the allotted time without reaching a clear conclusion. The only thing he won was finishing first in the number of non sequiturs. Yes, specifically the awkwardness of his answer on Tiananmen Square. But it was very reminiscent of Harris, and maybe it's who they are practicing with, where a sentence is almost started without, and I can't remember the one quote that said, but you start the sentence and not know where it's going to end, and just kind of make it up as you go. That's what it felt like very often. It was somewhat word salad, to use that term that they use so much for Harris, but really, as I said here, non sequiturs, not really relating to the question at hand. And that's why he was so shocked and really angry when he was asked a follow-up question, because kind of those non sequitur, non-answers are supposed to be good enough for the moderators. But voters looking for a point where they could say, aha, that's what the policy would be, had to be frustrated. I know I was, says Michael Goodwin from the New York Post. And it's been between the presidential and the vice presidential debates, we have not received a lot of substance, especially if you are a undecided, I should say, voter. Where can you really find out about the policies of a Harris Walz ticket? His opponent, Republican Senator J.D. Vance, was by far the smarter, more thoughtful, and more organized thinker on the stage. His tone was pleasantly even, whether he was defending Donald Trump or attacking Kamala Harris. Because VP debates are largely seen as referendums on the presidential nominees, Vance's performance was a boost for Trump and the GOP ticket. Walz, on the other hand, added to doubts about his readiness to serve, and thus was a minus for Harris. Yeah, at one point even literally being shaky when he's saying that the country needs steady leadership. The difference in temperament was so stark that Walz at times looked bug-eyed as he sped-talked his way through answers that often veered off course, as if his brain couldn't keep up with his mouth. Quote, "I've become friends with school shooters," he said during an answer on school safety. "I'm a knucklehead at times," was his final weird answer to a question about why he falsely claimed to be in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square crackdown. Vance, by contrast, was cool, deliberate, and polite to a fault. He called the moderators by their first names and began some answers by saying, "I agree with Tim," or saying they had common ground on an obvious move to be the one creating a civil and substantive tone. And it is interesting when he does do that first name basis. I believe that comes from the Sunday talk show interviews that he does, as well as if you watch one of his rallies, giving the press opportunity to ask him questions at the end. So again, this is from the New York Post. As expected, Vance had to combat moderator bias. Now, that was a question we posed earlier on. What did you think of the moderators? We've had kind of a mixed bag here from people writing in and commenting. Some saying they believed it was fair. Some kind of saying it's what they expected. Nonetheless, kind of a 3 out of 3 versus 1, scenario. But continuing. Vance had to combat moderator bias, according to Michael Goodwin, with Nora O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan from CBS far more interested in things Trump said or did than anything Harris said or did, despite the fact that she is now vice president. Several times they ended Vance's time by suggesting something he said was false, but never did that to Walz. And that's another part of that is frustrating, because once he says something and they fact check at the end without him having time to follow up, and that's the one time he did, they obviously muted his mic, which is a big takeaway from the story. So, again, Harris didn't have to deal with that. Walz didn't have to deal with it. It's Vance and Trump that have to deal with that. And it's again, showing the bias that so many people have talked about for years. But now I think even those that don't want to admit it have now begrudgingly admitted the bias. Michael Goodwin said the biggest problem that he found is that they introduced major topics, the economy and the open border, by saying that CBS polls show the majority of Americans favored Trump on both issues, but never revealed details or focused on the significance of the surveys. Those two questions alone could and should have driven the evening, because they're almost always the problems Americans cite as the most important. Yet media snobbery usually looks down on what the little people in flyover country care about, and so those two questions were raised in an obligatory fashion. Not incidentally, Walz was not asked the obvious follow-up question in either case, quote, "Why hasn't Harris fixed the economy and the border during her term as vice president?" The subject where Vance was least impressive was abortion. He tried to take a humble position, acknowledging that too many don't trust Republicans on the issue, and said we've got to do a better job of winning back people's trust. That might be a good starting point in a campaign, but it's late in the day to talk in such sackcloth terms. Walz was successful in highlighting the party differences on the subject, but couldn't effectively refute a Vance claim that a Minnesota law Walz signed allowed for abortions even if a full-term baby was born alive. Vance cited language he said the law contained, but Walz, while denying that, never quoted the actual language, which might have let the audience decide who won the moment. If there's any lasting impact to the face-off, it could be more evidence that Walz was not a good pick by Harris. He made a flashy entry, but his shtick as a Midwestern everyman in flannel shirts was quickly exposed as more hype than fact. Yes, we did not see that Midwestern everyman in flannel shirts. We will see that. I think he said pheasant season's coming up at some point. So you'll see more of those photo ops. But again, it goes to show you really the lack of judgment from Kamala Harris when it comes to picking Walz over Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. Everybody knows that, not everybody, I hate when the media says that, but the polling anyway shows that the White House leads through Pennsylvania, that you're not going to win the White House without Pennsylvania. So Josh Shapiro seemed like the no-brainer. As a matter of fact, I think many Republicans were preparing for that begrudgingly, not looking forward to that pick, and then it ends up being Walz. The undressing came when he was caught in a series of lies about his military service, including inflating his retired rank and falsely claiming to have served in a combat zone. He has never addressed the issue in a personal way, except to say in one interview he and Harris did together that my grammar is not always correct. Naturally, the CBS duo never went near that subject or any other false claim he made about his service. And there's also the comments that he's made in the past about his DUI arrest that has had a lot of misleading statements made, nor did they ask him about his long delay in calling in the National Guard as large stretches of Minneapolis were burning to the ground back in 2020 in the George Floyd riots. One area where Walz has been a bust is among union voters, usually a major strength for Democrats. We know the Teamsters and that breaking story. The Teamsters did not endorse Kamala Harris. But wrapping up, the tilt was even more pronounced in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, where 65% of the union members backed Trump, compared with just 31% who back Harris. Much of that is based on Harris's radical record, but Walz was supposed to fix that, and he has not. So that's a quick look. Now, in the post-debate flash polls, the ones that are done right at the end of the debate, it gives a narrow edge to Vance. A CNN survey, and this is important. Listen to how surveys and polls can be misused. A CNN survey of debate watchers found that 51% felt Vance won, while 49% said Tim Walz won. That poll oversampled Democrats by about 5 percentage points. Heading into the debate, 54 expected Walz to win, while 45 thought Vance would come off better per the poll. So your thoughts? We're doing our own flash poll here on Frankly Speaking, and there's been a mixed bag. Many people saying they believe that both candidates looked more presidential than the presidential candidates. What are your thoughts? Keep them coming in. If you're new to the show, you see the number on the bottom of your screen. Feel free to reach out at any time. We've got to take a short break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We will be right back. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. Thank you again for joining us. Getting away from last night's vice presidential debate because we just have a few moments to wrap things up, and I'd still love to read your comments like these coming in during the break. No, Walz was nervous because he knew that neither he or Harris had a leg to stand on with respect to the economy and so forth. Thank you very much. Another comment, J.D. Vance is an honest individual and appreciates how families have suffered in the Biden-Harris administration. Thank you very much. Now, as we had mentioned earlier with the attacks on Israel by Iran, we had mentioned kind of the implications of that. Benjamin Netanyahu, to paraphrase, saying that we're going to win this thing. But this has led to other scenarios. First of all, that Biden and the Harris administration have this fear of poking the Iranian bear. And we know going back that it was told to our allies not to criticize Iran for their nuclear weapons buildup because they didn't want any trouble during the election season. Iran clearly didn't learn from its failed attack on Israel back in April. On Tuesday, it fired another 180 ballistic missiles at the Jewish state, as back then most were intercepted. The only known death at the time of writing was that of a Palestinian man hit by an errant shrapnel. Pray the consequences for the mullahs this time are absolutely crippling. Iran has long needed to be reined in, punished for its decades-long campaign of terror, and deterred from more aggression once and for all. That is something the Harris-Biden folks have been too cowardly to address, too afraid of poking the bear, especially in the election season. Well, it turns out the bear has baby teeth, if that. Israel, by contrast, has recognized that the threat it faces must be addressed meaningfully, even if it entails risks. Let's hope that they don't repeat the Harris-Biden response last time when they actually ordered Benjamin Netanyahu to take the win and not return fire after Iran's aggression. Remember that statement? Well, meanwhile, Iran seems to have just made a big mistake, and it might just be great news for the entire world. We got to take our last break of this hour. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back. Boy, time flies. Thank you to everyone who joined us this morning. A couple last-minute comments here. Frank, have a great day. Enjoy. Thank you very much. That's very nice of you. Another comment from someone else. Question for you, Frank. What is your view about Biden essentially doing nothing about the strike? It doesn't really surprise me. It goes back to what we were saying about asking our allies not to even criticize Iran's nuclear ambitions because they didn't want any trouble before the election. So I guess I would just say not a surprise. Okay. The NYPD has increased security at synagogues after the Iranian missile attack on Israel, and there's also that terrorist attack as well, killing 7. by Tel Aviv. The NYPD has mobilized cops to Jewish houses of worship across the city Tuesday after Iran fired more than 100 rockets against Israel, officials have said. The enhanced deployment of police personnel, which has been in place for weeks, is set to extend through the high holy days, which will begin today with Rosh Hashanah and include October 7th, the one-year anniversary of Hamas's attack on Israel, which sparked the current Israel-Hamas conflict. And, we've talked about the protests in the street and the anti-Semitism that is happening on college campuses. Maybe this should come as no surprise to I'm not ending the show on a good note. There's others, but Gen Z workers, we learn, are training to become plumbers, electricians as they lose faith in college degree. A growing number of Gen Zers plan to pursue traditional blue-collar jobs in trades like welding, plumbing, and electrical work as young adults lose faith in the value of a college degree. According to a new study, about 23% of Americans who are not currently working in the trade field say they plan to move into blue-collar work, but that percentage rises to 50% for members of Gen Z, those born between 1997 and 2012. The survey found people aged 18 and over that Gen Z was becoming the tool belt generation because of their shifting attitudes and soaring costs of a college education. Realizing, as we talk so often on this program, that instead of being sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt starting off their life, they can start off their life making and earning money. As the promise of a 4-year degree falls short and the cost to receive a college degree continues to climb, young Americans are making blue-collar jobs cool again. Last couple quick things. New York about the port closing. There was a statement released. I know we talked about this extensively yesterday. I knew we wouldn't have as much time today because of the vice presidential debate. Governor Kathy Hochul releasing a statement after the ports closed down midnight yesterday. Moments ago, the first large-scale Eastern dock worker strike in 47 years began at ports from Maine to Texas, including at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. In preparation for this moment, New York has been working around the clock to ensure that our grocery store and medical facilities have the essential products they need. It's crucial for USMX and the ILA to reach a fair agreement soon that respects workers and ensures a flow of commerce through our ports. In the meantime, we will continue our efforts to minimize disruption for New Yorkers, adding that there's no rush to go out. Don't rush to go out to the grocery store to stockpile goods like during the pandemic. Because we know goods are going to suffer, prices are going to increase, as has been brought to our attention. A statement just released late yesterday from former President Trump on the issue, saying the situation should never come to this, and had I been president, it would not have. This is only happening because of the inflation brought on by Kamala Harris's 2 votes for massive out-of-control spending and her decision to cut off energy exploration. Americans who thrived under President Trump can't even get by because of Kamala Harris. This strike is a direct result of her actions. American workers should be able to negotiate for better wages, especially since the shipping companies are mostly foreign flag vessels, including the largest consortium one. All right, that does it for today. Boy, time went quickly. I want to thank our guest, Family Court Judge Mary Tarantelli, for being on the program this morning. Really appreciate her taking the time out to tell us about, she is currently the family court judge, but running for re-election to that 10-year term. So appreciate her being a part of it. Well, it was a very busy morning with the vice presidential debate. On tomorrow's program, former congressman and current candidate for assembly, also the current I always give him that increase, the Steuben County Republican chair, Joe Sempolinski. He'll be joining us in studio tomorrow. So if you have any questions for the former congressman about what's going on, of course, we'll talk a little bit about last night's debate with him, and we'll talk about all the breaking news going on internationally, as well as the dock workers and all the topics of the day. So that'll be former Congressman Joe Sempolinski. Get your questions in. He'll be on tomorrow starting a little before 7. We have guests, obviously, as we wind down near Election Day. We'll have guests pretty much consistently every single day. So make sure that you tune in every weekday morning, starting at 6 a.m. for Frankly Speaking, only on WYDC TV Big Fox. We will see you tomorrow morning bright and early, starting at 6 a.m. And as I said, Joe Sempolinski will be our guest. One last big thank you to Mary Tarantelli, Family Court Judge, for being on this morning's show. And thank you for all the comments and all the waves. Really appreciate everything you had to say. We will see you tomorrow morning, bright and early. I look forward to it. Alrighty. Have a great day, everyone.